Good evening. We begin tonight with a story that may be difficult for many to hear. Our President, Prabowo Subianto, has officially signed the ART Reciprocal Trade Agreement with the United States. It is being called reciprocal, but a look inside the 54-page document reveals a stark imbalance. The phrase Indonesia will appears 217 times. In contrast, America will appears just 6 times. 6. It raises a simple but powerful question. Is this an agreement or a neatly packaged surrender? This entire deal was brokered to avoid the threat of a 35% Trump-style tariff. But here's the problem. That very tariff policy has now been declared illegal and unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court. If that is the case, is this agreement protecting Indonesia, or is it poised to become a boomerang striking the nation's own interests? Let's break down the contents of the deal, because this is where all the irregularities begin. Under the ART agreement, Indonesia commits to opening its market, adjusting its regulations, and providing special guarantees for the interests of United States businesses. It may sound technical, but the impact strikes at the very heart of the national economy. Here is the first and most striking point. Indonesia will impose a 0% tariff on 99% of all United States products. This covers agricultural products, automotive, seafood, healthcare, and a host of other sectors. To put it simply, nearly all goods from the United States will now enter Indonesia tariff-free. The market is wide open, without a door, without a fence, not even a curtain. In return, Indonesia does get a 0% tariff exemption for several of its leading export products. These include palm oil, coffee, cocoa, spices, rubber, and some electronic components, garments, and apparel. This was stated directly by Erlangga Hartarto, but there is a critical note. Sensitive sectors are still subject to a 19% tariff. This means our access is not completely free. Next is the issue of digital taxes. Indonesia has agreed not to impose a digital services tax on American companies. These are not small players: Google, Facebook, Instagram, Microsoft, Netflix, and others. Yet these services are dominant in Indonesia, with an economic value of tens of trillions of rupiah each year. The consequence is clear: a potential loss of state revenue in a large amount. Then, there is a point that is very sensitive ideologically and legally: the loosening of halal regulations. American products entering Indonesia are exempt from halal certification. This means slaughtering standards will follow American rules. However, our law is clear. Every product that enters, circulates, and is traded in Indonesia must be halal certified. This is not a minor issue. This is about regulatory sovereignty. Then, the Freeport contract is extended until 2061. While Indonesia holds a 51% stake, the technology, management, and key supply chains are still controlled by foreign entities. As a result, large profits continue to flow abroad. It does not stop there. Indonesia also agreed to transfer consumer data to America. The risks are serious: access by foreign governments, a weakening of data sovereignty, more complicated law enforcement, and the potential for data misuse for business, political, or even cross-border intelligence purposes. But to be fair, the ART is not entirely bleak. There are 1,819 tariff posts for agricultural and industrial products that receive a 0% tariff. These include palm oil, coffee, cocoa, spices, rubber, electronic components, including semiconductors, aircraft components, and the garment industry. These are high-value export goods. There is also labor protection, with a push to revise labor laws regarding outsourcing and copyright. The issue is not whether there are benefits or not. The issue is the price that must be paid for all those benefits. This agreement was not without criticism, but the voices were not explosive. They were more like slow but sharp ripples. In Parliament, Commission 8 of the House of Representatives requested that the ART agreement be reviewed. Their main focus was on one crucial issue: the exemption of American imported products from halal certification. This issue also immediately drew attention from the Indonesian Ulema Council because it was seen as conflicting with the law and the principle of protecting Muslim consumers. From an economic perspective, the criticism was even harsher. The Institute for Development of Economics and Finance assessed that the Indonesia-US trade agreement is not equal and shows an imbalance in bargaining positions. Indonesia appears to be making more adjustments, while America is making more demands. One of the most problematic clauses is America's request for Indonesia to limit exports and investments from countries on the United States government's boycott list. This clearly means Indonesia is being forced to follow America's foreign policy line, and this directly contradicts its principle of a free and active foreign policy, which has long been the foundation of the Republic of Indonesia's diplomacy. Criticism also came from the former foreign minister of the Republic of Indonesia, Dino Padi Jalal. He emphasized the importance of discipline in diplomatic terminology. The use of the word alliance implies a meaning of allies and a strategic bond, which contradicts Indonesia's diplomatic tradition of always using the term partnership, not alliance. Among academics, the criticism grew sharper. A U.S. studies expert from the University of Indonesia, Suzy Sudarman, assessed that Indonesia is trapped in an unequal agreement, especially in the critical minerals sector, which requires the removal of export barriers. This was reinforced by Dina Prapto Raharja, who stated that this imbalance occurred due to a minimal diplomatic process and the lack of expert involvement from the beginning of the negotiations. And from the harshest perspective, Rocky Gerung concluded briefly but scathingly, Prabowo is leading Indonesia not as a partner, but as a subordinate of America. This is where the irony reaches its peak. Just one day after the ART agreement was signed, the United States Supreme Court issued a crucial ruling. The tariff policy launched by Donald Trump was declared illegal. Trump created that policy based on a law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The problem, according to the majority of justices, is that this law cannot be used arbitrarily to set import tariffs. 6 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices ruled that the policy violated the Constitution. This is because the establishment of tariffs must go through the approval of the United States Congress, not the unilateral approval of the President. This ruling is nationally binding. Legally, this clearly means that the Trump-style high tariffs should be void, and the United States government should only be allowed to apply a basic tariff of 10%. Then, an unavoidable question arises. If the tariff threat turned out to be illegal, why was Indonesia in such a hurry to sign the agreement? Some analysts suspect that Donald Trump already knew the direction of this ruling. Therefore, the agreement with Indonesia was signed as fast as lightning before the legal bombshell exploded. If this suspicion is correct, then the ART is not just an agreement, but a diplomatic trap. An agreement born from a threat that turned out to be legally null and void. And if this is what happened, Indonesia is clearly in a very disadvantaged position. The threat used as a pressure tactic was not valid. Responding to this dynamic, the Indonesian government stated it would open further talks with the Trump administration. The reason is that, until now, Indonesia is still subject to a 19% tariff, which is higher than the basic tariff that should apply. The problem now is not just about tariffs, but about something far more serious. Is Indonesia bound by an agreement born from illegal pressure? The main problem lies at one crucial point. The ART was signed before the United States Supreme Court ruling was issued. Once the signatures were affixed, the 19% tariff and all obligations within the ART automatically became the official guideline, regardless of whatever happened afterward. In other words, even though the United States Supreme Court later invalidated the legal basis for Trump's tariffs, Indonesia was already bound. Compare this with other countries. India was threatened with reciprocal tariffs of up to 50% for continuing to do business with Russia. But in the end, India was only subjected to a 10% tariff without having to sacrifice its national interests, without opening its market wide, and without submitting to sensitive clauses. Something similar happened with Vietnam. The United States was even said to be removing Vietnam from the list of countries with restricted access to advanced American technology. This means Vietnam actually received strategic incentives, not unilateral pressure. At this point, the question can no longer be avoided. Is this RT a win-win situation, or was it lopsided from the start? Many economists have weighed in. The cancellation of the tariff policy by the United States Supreme Court should have been a golden opportunity for Indonesia, a moment to review the agreement, at least to revise crucial articles, or even to dare to reject some of the commitments that are clearly one-sided and detrimental. Because in trade diplomacy, nothing is permanent except national interest. And if other countries can renegotiate their positions, only one question remains. Why can't Indonesia?